Welcome to another video, everybody. My name is Jaya, and today I thought I would come in with an exciting video because I have realized that as we hit this halfway point through the year and we're entering into the month of July for our second half of the year, that I have completed 104 books so far this year. So I thought for just a quick check-in in the mid-time of the year, as we enter into July, that I would do my top favorites of of the year so far. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, definitely stick around. I even surprised myself with some of my choices for these books this year. Without further ado, let's jump into the video. So the first book I have on my list here is actually Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Cavanagh. This book, I think, caught me by surprise because I wasn't anticipating such a twisty, turny kind of vibes in this book. And while it did become a little bit predictable by the end of the book, I did think it was really fascinating how the various characters wove in together. So to give a little bit of an idea, this book is basically following the story of two women who end up meeting in a support group during a grieving session. And it's following the storyline in that timeline. And then there's also a flashback that you get of a different character named Ruth, who unfortunately suffered from a home invasion and barely made it out alive. Over time, these storylines do intersect as the story continues, but essentially in the support group, it is basically for grieving people who have lost their children in the belief that this may have occurred because of an attack or a murder that occurred where the murderer got off scot-free. So two women end up meeting in this group and they decide together that they are going to kill the suspected person who most likely murdered their loved one. Obviously, already a little dangerous decision to make, but it's almost like the plot line of two strangers on a train. And I thought that I was not going to love this book, but I was actually really enjoying the twists and turns in this book. I just think it was developed so beautifully and done so beautifully. And I ended up really enjoying this story. So if you're looking for a good murder thriller, like fast-paced book that's just entertaining and fun to read, multiple plot points, multiple narrators, and just kind of some twists and turns being thrown at you throughout the course of the book, I definitely think that Steve Cavanagh did a phenomenal job with Kill for Me, Kill for You, and I would definitely recommend this book. Next up, I have The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Now, I did just recently talk about this book when I was doing my reading wrap-up for the month of July. I'll tag that video at the end of this for the end of June. If you haven't already watched that video, I'll go ahead and tag it here. So if you want more in-depth review, you will get a little bit more information on this book in that video. But this is basically following the story of Theo from childhood to adulthood, and it basically looks at his storyline and his development as a person, as a human, throughout the course of his life after he's being thrown from one chaotic situation to another. This is a beautiful story of coming of age. It really goes into the nitty-gritty aspects of the ugly parts of growing up as well as the beautiful parts of growing up, and how all of those things that we experience kind of culminate together to create the person that we become in the future. I think this book has something to offer for everyone. I can definitely see myself gravitating towards this book and read it again at some point. Now, I will say this is a longer book. It's about 769 pages long. So it is a bit of a trek of a read, and the pages, it's tiny font. It's not like it's big font in any way, shape, or form. I think this book is best enjoyed with a combination of physically reading and listening to the book. I think the ambiance that's set by listening to the narration of the book while physically reading this book was a wonderful way to kind of take this book in. I also think this is one of those books where you have to take breaks and you have to write down notes for yourself, or if you're looking for quotes, if you're a quotes person, if you love to highlight, this book can be highlighted through and throughout because it just has such mind-boggling quotes in there. Like, I just think Donna Tartt has a way with words and a way with understanding the human psyche, and she just puts it into such a beautiful written word that's just easy to follow and easy to enjoy for any age, really. I would say that you probably need to be at least 16 or 17 to pick this book up, just given the fact that this book starts following Theo from the age of 13 when there was a tragic incident that happened in his life. But I do think overall it's just a great read, and I strongly recommend this book. Next up, I have the book Scythe. Now, Scythe is a young adult book by Neil Shusterman. This book is basically set in a dystopian world where death no longer exists. Human beings have overcome the concept of death, and they now have nanotechnology that's kind of been mastered and placed within them so that all disease is eradicated, aging is kind of eradicated, and the only way you can die now is if you are reaped by a scythe. Scythes are individuals within the society who are selected specifically for their honor and their grace, as well as their respect for human life, and they're given the power to reap souls. However, as time has progressed, the scythedom has also changed, and now we have scythes who are more about the power, and to a certain extent, a level of tyranny is starting to occur. We have a divide between the new order and the old order. And in this book, you are basically following the story of Scythe Faraday, who is one of the most honorable scythes, who takes upon 2 apprentices, and his 2 apprentices are then taught his ways. But then through some mishaps that end up having in this book, one of the apprentices is forced to go under Scythe Goddard, who is basically the leader of the new order within the scythedom that believes that killing should be something you enjoy and that it is something that you should take pride in. And then you have our other scythe apprentice, Citra, who ends up going under Marie Curie, who was the scythe that trained under Faraday prior to these 2 kids. It is a beautifully done book in this dystopian novel. I'm not really doing a good enough job of describing this book. I'll also link my review of this series in this video at the end. So if you guys are interested in getting more details on this book, you can check that out. But for a young adult sci-fi book, this was beautifully done. Now, I will say with the political climate that's kind of going on right now, it may not be the best book to pick up, but at the same time, it does have a lot of comparative things in this book that are happening to what is happening in the world right now. But I do think in general, it was a very well done book. It was very powerful. It was very moving. And it was one of those books where even after I put it down, I was thinking about the book and how it had impacted me for days on end. Next up, so I decided to tackle the Fearless series this year by Lauren Roberts. This is a romantasy series. Now in this series, Fearless is the last book, Reckless is the second book, and Powerless is the first book. Powerless came out, I want to say almost 3-4 years ago, and then since then the series has now been completed. The original book basically starts off by sharing the story of our main female character, who is basically a ordinary woman who's trying to survive in a world that has been created for the elite. And if they find out she's ordinary, she will either get persecuted or she will be exiled. So for that reason, she is basically saying that she's actually a elite who has the ability to see psychic things, which has never been seen by anybody else. And she is then selected by the people in order to compete for them in a tournament against the other elites in the kingdom, one of whom happens to be the prince, who is being trained to be the enforcer for the kingdom. And his role, once he steps into it, is to basically eradicate all the ordinaries. So it's basically a lovers, enemies to lovers trope, and in that book it's also very high stakes, so that one was really enjoyable. Reckless basically picks up from where the first book had ended, and now the 2 of them are kind of in exile and they've been separated from one another. She's on the run and he's basically hunting her down, but the only thing is he is hunting her down in honor of his brother, who is now the newly appointed king, and she is basically on the run for her life, and he feels like his heart is breaking as he chases her across the map in order to bring her back to pay for her crimes, because secretly they are both madly in love with each other. This book, I think, was just so much more beautiful to read because it really focused on the character development. It really focused on the romance. You also got to see the growth of both of the characters. You also got to see a lot of gray in this book as both of the characters kind of have to deal with the repercussions of the choices that they've made. And so that was really interesting to see as well. And I think overall, the romance of this book was just very sweet. I think when I think romantasy, this is definitely what I was looking for, and this is definitely what hit home for me. With both Fearless and with Powerless, I did get a little overwhelmed with all the trials that were happening in the book, and I did feel like a lot of them were overdone, and it felt a little too Hunger Gamesy to me for certain areas of the book. But I think Reckless in particular was really fun because you actually got to see other aspects of the kingdom outside of the hierarchy of the elites versus the non-elites. You got to see what kingdoms look like that didn't have the elite system at all within their community. And then you also got to see a little bit more plotline driven romance in this book as well, which I think was really beautiful to see. So Reckless was definitely one of those books that made me smile, made me cry, made me happy, made me laugh, made me scream, made me go through a range of emotions. And to me, that's always a great book. So I will say this probably made it into my top favorites of 2025 thus far. Okay, next up, I have Somewhere Beyond the Sea. TJ Klune has a way with words. He has a way of weaving a novel, writing a story that is so powerful, so beautiful, that makes you just want to laugh, cry, scream all at once. And again, it's one of those books that just pulls all of your emotions out. This one is a little bit more on the fantasy side. Basically, it's about a queer couple who is running an orphanage for monsters. And these children are basically ostracized by their communities because no one really understands them and they assume the worst of them. However, at the end of the day, they're just children that are trying to grow up and just want love and welcoming and want a way to connect with their parents. Arthur and his partner in this book have decided that they're going to adopt all of these kids. And at the end of the first book in this series, which is House in the Cerulean Sea, which was one of my all-time favorite books ever, and honestly was such a hard 5-star book for me that I ended up recommending it to everybody that I know. This book is a strong contender for that place because it just has so much emotion in this book, and it speaks to so many societal things that we face on a day-to-day basis, whether it be people being racist or people being, you know, unforgiving towards things they don't understand. The dangers of ignorance are really, really explored in this book. And I just think the beauty of seeing how community can rally once that ignorance has been removed was beautiful to see. The cast of characters in this book are so colorful, they're so much fun, and they're such joyful characters. These kids, like, your heart melts when you read about these kids. And I think just watching Arthur's journey as he goes to testify about his experiences because of the government when he was put through foster care versus what he's trying to create now from within the system and the change that he's trying to employ, it was just a beautiful novel to read. This book at the end also left off on a little bit of a cliffhanger, so I'm really hoping that TJ Klune is going to give us another one of these because I am eating these stories up. And I can honestly say pretty much any standalone that TJ Klune comes out with, I am probably going to end up reading. This author is so phenomenal, and I honestly feel like if you haven't checked him out, you should go check him out because he just has a way of creating magic with his words. I will say, if it's not your inclination to go read anything by him, or if you're like, maybe I'll try just one book, start with House in the Cerulean Sea, finish off with Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. This is not only going to be a favorite of 2025, I guarantee this is probably going to be a lifelong favorite for me. Next up, we have one of my favorite authors of all time, and that is none other than Fredrik Backman. This year, at the beginning of the year, I had the absolute pleasure of completing the series from Beartown, and that included The Winners, which is the third book in the series, and Us Against You, which is the second book in the series. This story basically follows a small town that is completely hockey driven. And in the first book, something tragic happens and you basically see the split that occurs in the city and how mob mentality can become overwhelmingly dangerous in terms of the repercussions that it has for victims. From there, these two books have basically been woven to continue the story. So in Us Against You, you now have two different teams that have been established in terms of the hockey teams within the borderline cities. And you just see that rivalry continue, but you also see the city trying to pick up after itself, and you get more involvement with other characters within the city as they try to overcome the damage and the pain that has been created from the previous storyline. You also have a death of a favorite character in this book that was just absolutely devastating and painful to watch happen, but it was also really beautiful to see the exploration of ideas of friendship, family, community within this book. Similarly, in The Winners, you have a very similar presentation of that, but now we have even more competition occurring because we have the two teams competing at the championship level, and you basically get to follow the storyline from beginning to end, and you also get to see how various aspects of the community within the community end up having to work together. You basically have the elite portion of the community having to come together with the slums of the community in order to root for their team and to support their town. I think in general, both of these books are just so beautifully done. Fredrik Backman in general is one of those authors who just knows how to tell a story. I would be amazed if he doesn't become an author that is eventually discussed in schools, that is not eventually talked about in other arenas, such as even potentially for a classic recommendation, because he just tells such a powerful and beautiful story. I think the main thing about Fredrik Backman that is so unique and so special to him is his ability to tell a story with short sentences and basically transport you directly into that character's mindset, as well as into the setting that these stories are going through. He also explores a lot of heavy-hitting topics, but in very delicate ways where it doesn't feel overwhelming, but it still opens up the discussion. Topics on being gay, topics on loss, topics on suicide, topics on being born on the wrong side of the track and just needing a second chance, topics about money divisions, topics about classism. There's so many different heavy-hitting topics that are discussed in this, and I just feel like Fredrik Backman has a way of weaving a story that really makes you think about society and society as a whole and how it impacts us on our day-to-day, and inspires you to almost be better. I think the best thing about Fredrik Backman, though, is even though he rips your heart out in every book and you cry in every single book, by the end of it, you do end up feeling that warmth coming back, and you feel like your cold limbs that he just froze frigid with the amount of pain he's caused you is now resolving by the end of the book. And they just wrap up so beautifully as well. So these books will definitely be following me for a lifetime, and I can honestly say any Fredrik Backman book that comes out, I will be reading it. It's just some of the books might require a little bit of a break before I can read it. Just as a heads up, he did release his newest book, My Friends, and that book is already getting rave reviews online. People are saying it's one of his best works yet, that it's really, really emotional and very powerful and very intense, but it's one of those books where page to page to page, he is just creating a new emotional trope within his readers. And I just think that is so exciting to hear. I've also heard, please read that book when you're in a better mental state and you're able to handle it, because it is a very intense novel, and have a very light, fluffy romance ready to go right after, because it is going to tear you apart. But I have heard it's absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into it. Next up, I have another sci-fi book. This book is called Recursion. This book was by Blake Crouch. This I actually recently discovered when I was doing my sci-fi month, I want to say in the month of May, and I was impressed by how much I loved this book. This book is basically exploring the idea of what happens if you can go back in time, or you can influence time with the use of a chair that allows you to move parallelly in various aspects of time, and basically you are the only one that remembers doing this. I think this was such a fascinating concept. I think initially the book kind of explores how it's really cool and how it can be utilized for great things within the hands of just the creator. Then it kind of expands to what happens if the government takes over it. Then it expands to what happens if worldwide people find it. Then it explores the idea of terroristic attacks. And then it brings us back to this idea of how much science is too much science, and can we reverse the damage that we have created. Beautiful, beautiful book. So interesting. And I think as someone who is Hindu, who believes in ideas of like reincarnation and multiple lifelines and multiple, there's just a lot of things, right, that are up in theory right now that we don't really fully understand. Time as a construct is definitely something we see as linear, but obviously there's been scientific discussions about the question of whether time is actually as linear as we believe. Obviously the ideas of time travel and things like this has been something that's been thrown around in the science world forever. Just keep in mind this is definitely sci-fi, but I just think the ideas that are explored in this book are so cool and so interesting. And I literally wrote down pages of notes on this book that just left me with questions. I still have the notes today, and at this point I have so many questions written just to talk about with someone else who's read this book, because it is just that powerful. So that being said, I definitely feel like Recursion was a wonderful, wonderful experience to read. And I definitely see myself enjoying Blake Crouch more in the future. I actually read 3 of his books in May and I enjoyed all of them. But I would say Recursion was my favorite and has still stuck with me till today. Next, I have up another author that's very celebrated and very popular. You guys may know her for her The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. V.E. Schwab was very celebrated for that book, and she's written a multitude of books that are also within kind of that sci-fi-esque sphere. And one of the series that she wrote is actually a duology about 2 friends who end up becoming frenemies as they overcome their mortality with the use of science and basically end up developing magical powers and become extraordinary human beings. Now, in this world, extraordinary human beings are new and they're not fully understood, and there becomes a moral dilemma and a moral question of what happens if you die and then you come back, but something feels like it's missing. And this is basically X-Men on steroids. This is basically like every sci-fi story you can think of, whether it's Lex Luthor and Superman, or it's, you know, who else is a classic villain? Those are the main ones that are popping into my head. Or like Batman and Joker, you know? Think of your favorite superhero tropes, and that's basically the story of Eli and Victor. And these books are just written so well. They're fun, they have a kick, they have a punch to them, and they're just so fun. The supernatural experience that you get reading these 2 books by V.E. Schwab will stick with you, I think, for a lifetime. They will definitely be sticking with me, and I am so thankful to have these on my shelf. And these are definitely 2 books that I can see myself rereading, which is why I feel like deep down, I know this is a 5-star hitter for me. So once again, would strongly recommend Vicious and Vengeful, and they definitely made it into the top books of 2025 thus far. Next up, I have The Murder at the End of the World. This is also a sci-fi-esque book. This is written by an author named Stuart Turton, who is one of my favorite authors of all time. He's written 2 other books that I absolutely think were wonderful. One of them is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which is basically like a murder mystery that's kind of happening. Think Clue vibes, right? But in a book, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And then he also wrote another book called The Devil in the Dark Waters, and that was also absolutely amazing. Every single book that he writes, though, is a little bit different from the previous book. This book is basically looking at the future when human beings have significant advancement in terms of science, but have not necessarily overcome their flaws, if you will, and have basically destroyed the rest of the planet. So there's this small island that's created with a few human survivors, and you have the scientists that basically help these humans cultivate the island, and the scientists are 3 of the last remaining humans in the world, because the rest of the world has been covered by a fog that basically led to the extinction of much of the human population and the human race. However, all of a sudden, this peaceful island wakes up one morning to the death of one of their beloved scientists, and they have to figure out who committed the murder within 24 hours. Otherwise, the fog will also penetrate the island, and all of them will die. The only problem is, when they wake up in the morning, nobody remembers what happened, including the murderer themselves. So they're not sure what actually happened and who committed the murder. And they have to work really fast in order to figure out how to stop that fog from entering into the island. It is such a fun, fast-paced book. Again, a lot of social discussion in this book, a lot of question marks of, you know, what's truly important in life, in friendship, in family, and all that kind of stuff, and what defines a person's passion, their vocation, and things like that. It's a very fascinating book. There's a lot of different things that are kind of discussed in this book, and I think there's a lot of political intrigue that's going on within the storyline. There's also a lot going on just in terms of the science. There's a lot going on in terms of the thriller that's happening. So in general, just a great book, and I definitely enjoyed this book. This is also one of those books that has just stuck with me, and I've even been thinking about it well after I finished reading the book, and it's one that I oftentimes find myself suggesting to other people. So would strongly recommend this book, and will definitely say that it has hit the top of 2025 thus far. And the last book that I have is actually a surprise to me, and that is Addicted for Now. Now, this series is basically a series that follows 3 different couples. And the two main couples, the main couple that you see in the entire series is Lauren and Lily. Now, the thing is, Lauren is a alcoholic and Lily had a sex addict problem, but the series is basically following these characters as they overcome their addictions and grow. And I wasn't anticipating to love these books as much as I did, but I really enjoyed the found family. I really enjoyed the love and the care and the just support that these characters show for one another. I loved seeing the growth specifically of Lauren and Lily as they overcome their addictions and learn how to grow with them. I loved watching these characters grow up from being children in college, making complete fools of themselves, unable to handle their family dynamics, coming from severe privilege and trying to navigate that, to then becoming people of their own right who are able to stand on their own 2 feet with families of their own. And I think that's just so beautiful. But Addicted for Now in particular was very special to me because this is the first time you actually get to see our 2 main characters facing the repercussions of the choices that they've made and having to let in people as it becomes public knowledge that they do have these problems. And it shows the 2 characters really putting each other first and putting that relationship first and actively trying to grow while not becoming overly codependent on the other person. It was just such a beautiful love story, such a family found story. Like, I was just very impressed by the quality of this series, and I didn't think I would love it as much as I did. I thought it was just going to be like a fun fiction book to read over the summer, and that was going to be it. But I was very surprised by how hard-hitting the entire series was. But in specific, I really loved Addicted for Now. I also have an entire series review on the Calloway Sister and Addicted series. So if you are interested in watching that, definitely go check that video out as well on the channel. And I go into a lot more details about all the different books and all the different couples. But I have to say that I was very impressed by how hard-hitting this was, and it definitely made it into the top 25. Into the top books of 2025 for me so far this year. And that brings me to the end of this portion of the video. I realized that I just talked about my favorite books, so I think it's also important to talk about a few of the books that didn't quite hit home for me. One of them was Pucked by Helena Hunting. I hated this book. I don't think I've hated a book as much as I've hated this book, actually. That one was basically soft erotica, in my humble opinion. The characters have very little emotional connection or emotional growth in that book. I think in general, their relationship was a bit of a joke, and I found it really, really difficult to root for the 2 characters. That being said, I'm not saying anything against this author. I realize she's very popular. I realize a lot of people love these books, and I'm not saying anything against any of the people who are fans of these books as well. I just realized her writing style was not for me. I, in particular, don't care for relationships that are primarily starting off from a physical basis. I do need a little bit of an emotional connection to really root for the characters. So I struggled from that perspective. I also found the main female lead very two-dimensional, which was very frustrating for me because the book was narrated from her perspective. So unfortunately, that book did rank a 1-star for me, and unfortunately that book had to be removed from my collection. It has now found a home where it will be much more appreciated and loved by the person who has taken that book, and I'm so glad it has been rehomed in a loving environment, but it was definitely not getting the love it deserved on my shelf. The next book is One in a Millennial. This is actually a memoir. It's not so much that I'm giving it a star rating as much as I was frustrated by the concept of this book, because I was really hoping for more of the author's personal experiences and how her lifetime in the 90s and being a millennial and the experiences she went through really shaped her as a person. And instead, what I got is a lot of narrative of the 90s. So I think there was a lot I could relate to, having grown up in the millennial era and being a millennial myself. But I didn't feel like I got much memoir vibes from that book. I got a lot more timeline lapse and just historical narration of what happened during the various time periods of the 90s. But I think that was very frustrating for me, is that it wasn't quite a memoir. That being said, it was not a bad book. I did actually end up giving this book a 3-star just because I could relate to it. But I feel like because it was marketed as a memoir, but it's so focused to millennials, and it's so focused to that time period, and it's more focused on what happened during that time period, I just don't feel like it's going to hit home for a lot of other people that may have been intended to read this book. I do think it'll be special within the millennial sphere specifically, but I don't know if it will stand the test of time. The next book I have on here is The Dragon Republic. Now, Poppy Wars, I think, is a phenomenal series, and R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite authors of all time. And The Poppy Wars was truly an amazing trilogy. However, that second book, The Dragon Republic, was painful to read. And that is because we hate our main character. And I have talked to so many friends who have also read this book, and I've met so many people who started the series super strong, loved the first book, got to the second one, got so overwhelmed and so bogged down that they just stopped reading the series. And I am here to tell you that I was almost that person. I was almost that person. Dragon Republic was so challenging for me to read because it was truly, truly, truly a pain in the butthole to read. It was a 2-star read for me. And I realized that it was worth finishing the book, though, because the reason it was a 2-star read is because of the emotions it was pulling for me. And any book that can pull emotions in that kind of way from me usually means it's actually a very well-written book. It just wasn't the right book for me. So I think The Dragon Republic is an interesting one to be on the lower end of the spectrum, because while it is a book that I truly, truly hated and I really struggled with finishing because I just was so frustrated with our main character throughout the entirety of that book, and it's set in a war province, and you're dealing with PTSD, and you're dealing with drug abuse, and you're dealing with like poor leadership and just a lot going on in that book that's just really, really depressing and painful. I do think it's such a powerful read. So I don't see myself rereading that book, but I will still stand on a soapbox and say The Poppy Wars is worth reading, and I do think it's worth it to read the third book because the third book is a little bit more uplifting than the second book, and I just think the way that the story culminates is great. But anyone walking into that series, just remember it's a war time. They are in the middle of a war. You're gonna get a lot of that vibe, but if you're looking for a heavy-hitting book that's really powerful, emotionally driven, flawed characters in this environment, that is the right series for you. Last but not least, I actually have Problematic Summer Romance on my least favorites, and it's not because the Ali Hazelwood book was bad by any means. It was actually a 3-star read for me, but it just felt a little too repetitive. I feel like the storyline was a little too predictable, and I just felt like at this point, it just feels like the books are getting churned out just to get churned out, and every single story is becoming the same story. And I also feel like it's focusing more and more on the physical, which is really bothersome to me, because the beauty of the love hypothesis and love theoretically is the relationship that the characters actually create with the other significant other, both in terms of the main male character as well as the main female lead character. And I think the newer books, it's just harder to see that connection with these characters. In specific, I think Problematic Summer Romance was also really frustrating because it leaned very heavily on Not in Love, which was probably my least favorite Ali Hazelwood book of all time. The cast of characters in Problematic Summer Romance was really great, but I did feel parts of the book were also a little bit choppy and kind of thrown together. So overall, it was not my favorite, but that being said, I still enjoyed it. I still read it page to page, cover to cover, and that one was one of those that I just sat down and physically read the book. I didn't listen to any audio. Like, it was one of those that I wanted to physically read and just immerse myself in the experience because it's set in Italy, and I was like, this sounds amazing because I've been there, and it was just it was a good experience, and it was a fun read, don't get me wrong, but it was a disappointment in the sense that I was expecting more from Ali Hazelwood, who I really thought would be one of my fan favorite authors. But the reason why it is unfortunately getting slotted into one of my least favorite books of 2025 is because that was kind of the cherry on the top of the milkshake that made me think to myself, maybe I need to start taking a break from Ali Hazelwood. So I will absolutely be reading Mate, only because it's related to her paranormal fiction. And I really did enjoy Bride. I thought that was absolutely hilarious and it was very unique. So I'm excited to read Mate and see if we can get that energy back. But if we don't, then that might be the end of my journey with Ali Hazelwood as a consumer and a reader, at least at this time, which is so sad and heartbreaking to say because my heart goes out to my fellow STEM lady out there. And I think it's so amazing what she's creating and what she's done. And the fact that she's released like 7 books in the span of 4 to 5 years is insane. It's incredible. And power to her to be able to create these stories and to weave these stories together. But unfortunately, it is ranking in some of my least favorites of 2025. because of the fact that I think I just need to take a break from the author. If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. That does bring me to an end in terms of my check-in for books that I absolutely fell in love with and books that I haven't necessarily fallen in love with as we hit our midway point of the year, walking into July, and also as I have completed 104 books thus far this year. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was interesting. If you guys have any thoughts on these books, please leave me comments below. For those of you that are new here, welcome. My name is Jaya. I like to put out bookish related content every Wednesday and Sunday. So if you have a fiction addiction, you're definitely in the right place, and consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell if you want to be a part of our community. For those of you that are returning, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for building this bookish community with me. It is such an honor and a privilege to be able to create this content and to share it with you guys, because it is truly my honor to be able to discuss these books with such wonderful community. And I cannot thank you enough for being here and for watching the video. And wherever you are, whether it's morning, night, or evening, I hope you're having a lovely, lovely day. And I wish you and your loved ones all the joy and happiness in the world. And I look forward to talking to you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.